Okay, there we go. It's nice to see that you're all still here. And it's a bit sad that Sarah is not here and only appeared in recording because I'd like to complain that she stole half my talking points. But yeah, I'll nevertheless talk to you about shadow IT mindsets for corporate employees. And yeah, if my colleagues wouldn't have done such nice work on priming you, I would have said, well, let's make sure you all know what shadow IT is. Well, you partially know because we've talked about shadow security, but shadow IT is any form of IT used on the job without explicit approval or knowledge of the organization. While what do I mean by mindset? It's a mental representation of a concept or idea. And so, how do we combine those? The problem with shadow IT is that it's so broad, we need to subdivide it at some point. So along came the topology of Mellman, where we said, like, okay, shadow IT needs to be subdivided into different types. For one thing, we find unapproved cloud devices, which is, for example, using your private Dropbox on the job, even though there's official regulations that say, hey, use something else. Then we find self-made solutions, which is basically, well, if you can develop it yourself, anything you hack together yourself or hack of something existent. We find self-installed applications that are non-standard. And last but not least, we find self-acquired devices, so that's anything from the proverbial USB stick of Doom or maybe your own NAS that you have attached somewhere under your desk. So what motivated us here that, okay, shadow IT, it's not new. It's like 10 plus years old at this point, but it seems very, very prevalent. It's like almost everywhere. And in current literature, there is this trend to see like, it's a threat, it's out there. And we need to search and destroy it wherever we find it. But we said like, well, maybe if we go back to how things were and see it as more of an indicator, that might be nice, right? Because as Sarah also said, yeah, these people are working around something, so there must be some reason why you'd think like, hey, let's do things differently. So in our full publication, we focused on the implication of shadow IT mental models for a larger organization. We being, well, me, Floris Jansen, Slinger Jansen, no relation there, and Kate Labunets, which you might have seen running around here in the last few days. So what if we actually do? We asked ourselves, if you look at the large organization, does your position in the company pyramid have any impact on shadow IT usage? Like, do the higher-ups use more or less of it? Who knows? Well, I do now, and after this talk, you will do. Then we wondered, how do they perceive shadow IT? Do they even see the risks that we maybe perceive about it? Is that a thing? And specifically, depending on how they use it, because not everyone does, which mindset motivates them to use it or just to stay away from it? So to answer those questions, we approached the Dutch branch of a large professional services organization with various departments, various ranks, ran a survey with 450 usable responses on the shadow IT usage, and based out of these 450, we got 32 participants who were willing to talk to us for about an hour about shadow IT. And yeah, to really, really quickly sum up the survey, if you look at this, depending on the various scenarios and where to use it, there's a high percentage of people using at least one form of shadow. If you're wondering why this sometimes adds up to above 100%, that's because those are not exclusive. So it might be that you use it for like different things. Moving right along into the interview. So as I said, we asked 32 people, which we tried to get from all ranks and all departments, and talk to them about like, what's your understanding of shadow IT? Have you heard our definition before? What's your reasons for using it? Do you see the risks? Are you aware of the relevant organizational policy that's in place? And is it discussed among colleagues? Is it water cooler talk to talk about this stuff or no? And how well informed do you feel about this? So, as a general observations, what drives this? If your approved solution fails to meet your needs, bam, chance for shadow IT. If there's a work requirement maybe, or a client project, especially when some outsiders are like, yeah, but we need this tool, bam, another chance that shadow IT creeps in. Maybe it's just a habit that you have this like leftover tool from somewhere and you've been using it for 10 plus years, still good. Might be shadow IT. Or maybe there's a limitation in your current environment. I'm not even saying that's an existing limitation, it might just be a perceived limitation. Because as we learned, transparency is very important, that people talk to each other in both ways. So we found in total 10 mindsets. I'll go through each of them really, really fast, and even though it looks like these are like 2 blocks, don't view these as binary black and white things. We're not saying that, oh, if you hold one of the risk-averse ones, you can't hold one of the risk-taking ones. We're not quite sure how they interact yet, but we're relatively sure they're not black and white. So, running through them. First, we have one that we dubbed the consequence avoidance orientation mindset. Here, you are aware that there is something out there. There be dragons, and you best avoid them. Then we found knowledge-based conservatism, which is closely related, because in that case, yeah, okay, you are aware, not only aware that there are dragons, you can also like name some of them. You are slightly more aware of the type of danger, and thus avoid it. Then we find the risk transfer mindset, which mostly occurs if you come to situations where you work for a client, and then you say like, oh, well, I mean, it's their risk, they are covering it, so I'm more or less safe. Everything that's risky occurs over there. And finally, the cautious, seasoned judgment. And what we mean here is basically, to get back to my earlier example, not only do you know some dragons, you also fought some in your time and you survived. Hence, you try to avoid further conflict. Speaking of conflict, now we're moving into the risk-taking mindsets. For one thing, there's the common sense fallacy that we found, where people basically go like, well, I mean, it's just, certain things are just common sense. Everybody knows that, right? Because everybody has been in this company for a while, so there couldn't be anything wrong here, right? And we find the illusion of sufficiency, which is really interesting if you go through the interviews, because you find quotes like these from our participants where they say like, yeah, we have everything taken care of, only to like 5 sentences later, like very clearly state that they use certain forms of shadow IT. So moving on, we also have the misguided sense of protection, where they are nicely enough aware that, of course, the IT department exists and is there to protect them, but they also assume that the IT department is able to protect them from anything and everything out there, every possible human or technical error. You might see the problem there. And finally, we find performance-driven rule bending, where some party might say like, okay, we need to, oh, I don't know, strap a jetpack to an octopus. And even though company policy might be like, don't strap jetpacks to octopi, yeah, show must go on. You need to continue your work. Your work needs to be finished. So here we go. Then we have longevity-based invincibility, where something has been around for just so long. It worked yesterday, and nobody cares that it's a bug-ridden mess by now that's unpatched for like a decade, but we need it. And finally, yeah, you might want to cut costs, and that's a good thing for the company, right? So why not grab some freeware from the internet? What could possibly go wrong there? So all in all, what do you do with shadow IT? If you're a company, then it's relatively easy, and it's stuff that you've heard other speakers also say. It's make sure that your software is usable. Make doubly sure that the security is usable. Make sure that your training is useful. Because if you make it mandatory and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, at some point, usefulness might drop. Make sure that your users have a way to communicate their needs. make that training targeted. If you know that they hold a certain mindset, then they might not care about certain aspects. But then you can come from another angle. And have some protocol in place for these rule-bending situations so that even if they come up with something that isn't yet part of the official toolbox, that they have some way to integrate it into what is company policy. And if you find long-term instances that are just wobbling around somewhere in your environment, well, try asking your users, why do you feel like you need this? There must be some reason, right? So here's why I want to pluck your brains for a bit. Because at this moment, I just threw some theory at you. I need to validate this. I'm think, yeah, okay, some of these sound like the concept of bias. Where's the difference? How can we make sure that our set is exhaustive? Because we don't claim that, but hey. Do you see any relation to models from your field? How do you model interactions between these things? I'm not sure. Do you see any glaring omissions? So, yeah, I'm sorry, I ended this with questions for you, even though now it's a part where you have questions for me. And also, yeah, if you think like, hey, we'd like to host you for a research day, please get in touch. Thank you very much for your attention.